Everyone, we're here at this synagogue in the east side in Manhattan, and this is Joshua Rabbi. Joshua, thank you for letting us be here. Give us a tour. I've never been to a synagogue. First time in my life.
Synagogue. Well, yes. Welcome. So, welcome to the Stanton Street Shul. You're free to, use the camera to take whatever videos you want. The synagogue was built in 1913. Though the community predates 1913 by a few years. The full name of the synagogue is Congregation Bnai Jacob Anshei Brzezan. I'll explain what that means in a second. But it's a bit of a mouthful to say, so calling it the Stanton Street Shul is easier, and people also know where it is, although people ask, where's the Stanton Street Shul? On Stanton Street, it takes a bit. So the reason why it's called Anshei Brzezan is most of the Lower East Side was made up of an immigrant community. And when the immigrants came in from Europe, they set up local communities or synagogues based on the specific towns they were from. So even if they came from a certain region, if they were the closer to where you came from, if there wasn't a synagogue for your specific city or town, you would go by country. And that's how a lot of these small synagogues set up, because yes, you're all Jewish, you might be in the New World, but each community had its own, sometimes its own customs, its own style, but there was a greater chance of keeping that family connection with the old world. So Brzezan was the community of the real first founders. In subsequent years, the community shrank. As Jews moved away, Jews died out. You didn't have as many. There was at one point over 300 synagogues. And it's synagogues, it doesn't just mean like a big building. It could have just been meeting in one room. So you had 300 of them, and now you're down to, maybe 10 or so, probably less, that are still functioning as synagogues.
In New York City?
No, just in the Lower East Side.
Oh.
There are many more throughout New York, but the Lower East Side was very unique because this is where a lot of the Jewish immigrants first came to and wound up settling. So for a while, it was a huge, huge hotbed of Jewish life, but also for many Jewish immigrants, you had some connection here, family. Frequently, if you immigrated to New York, you came through the Lower East Side at one point or another. Anyway, as the synagogues condensed, this synagogue had merged with two other communities from the same region in Europe. So the name is Brzezan, but we still have members from other communities in the same European region.
Brzezan is from where?
Brzezan is in a place called Galicia. It's kind of like Eastern Poland, Russian-ish, in that kind of area. The borders keep changing, so it's hard to say what it is now.
Russia, maybe.
Yeah. So the way that it is currently set up is, being an Orthodox synagogue, we have separate seating for men and women. In the past, the women would sit up on the third floor in the balcony, which I can show you a little bit later. You'll get a different view. Now, women sit behind this partition called the mechitza. So women sit in the back, men are up here. And for speeches and the like, we pull it aside so we can actually speak to people. The other really interesting feature of this synagogue is along the walls, you see unusual murals. There are only two synagogues in, I've been told, North America that have these. The other one is actually a few blocks away. These murals on the wall are in Hebrew mazalot, and they kind of represent the Jewish zodiac. I'm not entirely sure who put it up or why. They've kind of fallen out of favor due to associations with idolatry or other sorts of mysticism, but for a while, they were kind of important. So over there, that one, you've got a picture of two birds for the month of Sivan, corresponding to Gemini, the twins. And some things line up, some things don't.
And Gemini.
There you go.
And weird wings as well.
Works out very nicely. And these separate ones that are hanging were all done by members of the community itself. And they're kind of as tributes or their own interpretations of the ones that were old. The community today of the Stanton Street Shul is very diverse and eclectic. It goes back many years where the longtime rabbi was a Rabbi Singer, and he sort of operated as a social worker too, and he welcomed in people who didn't really fit in anywhere else. In the early 2000s, this building was actually sold, and many people started coming to it to save the synagogue, because when you lose a synagogue, it's gone. No one's building more synagogues in Manhattan, and especially a historic synagogue. When you lose history, you're never going to get that back. So people started coming back to the synagogue because, not so much for ideological reasons, but because they wanted to save the synagogue. And that led to a very religiously diverse group. So we happen to have many artists, many musicians, some incredibly talented people. Like, even when you just look around the building, you won't find many synagogues that look like this. You can also see it's in somewhat of a state of disrepair. We have water damage. There's a lot that we'd like to do to fix up the synagogue if we had the finances for it. But some people can walk in here and say, this synagogue needs a lot of help. Other people walk in and have there's a certain aura about it that you don't find so many places. So fortunately, we attract the people who come in here and feel at home. There's something very unique about being here. And with the whole aesthetic, since it does look old, but it doesn't look too old. So for people who come, there's a sense that their grandfather could have prayed in a place like this. And it's a connection to a more recent historical memory. Now, people can talk about Jewish history going back 2,000 years, but no one remembers 2,000 years. You might remember, 50 or something like it. Somebody who knows someone, or it seems it's accessible history would be a good way of putting it. So we get a lot of people who come in and really get that vibe. It's just because it's a narrow place, it creates a little more intimate atmosphere. The motto of the synagogue is all are welcome, all will feel welcome. And that's something that it really succeeds in. So in any given service, we can have people from all different backgrounds just coming in and sitting and praying. And
mostly
discussing
Jewish?
Pretty much all Jewish. Periodically, a few non-Jews have come in to observe. No one really asks questions. Want to hear? Sit down. Not disrupt. Sure, go ahead. But certainly within the Jewish communities, it's unusual, especially in New York, where there's so many options, to have a synagogue that attracts a diverse population, certainly the one that we do. And many of the people who come here, even though they're not that observant, and this is an Orthodox synagogue, wouldn't go to another synagogue. But they come here. It's a place where they can approach God on their own terms, maybe not in terms of strict Jewish law, but they're still here, they're still interested, and they're still learning. And for my own approach, religious observance is in a large part a journey, and you never know where people are going to go in any step. And as long as people are in the room, I know that they're interested and they want to learn something, and I have no idea what people are going to take. I assume people are going to do what they want anyway. That's just how people are. But you never know what statement you make that could be of influence to anyone. So for me, it's what is one of the more exciting things about being here. We have, because people have so many different types of backgrounds. When I give a sermon, I have to be substantive for the people in the congregation who have PhDs, while remaining accessible to people with no background at all. So I can't take any shortcuts. I can't rely on simplistic jargon or explanations. And I also can't just throw out big words and say, yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. Everything needs to be presented in order. And that's a very fun challenge, because here, when you cut past all the superficialities, people talk with each other. And often it's the people who have no background, who have come at it like with a clean slate, who ask some incredibly pointed questions. That lead to wonderful conversations. Like, one of my favorite questions I got here was, why do we have to listen to rabbis when it's the rabbis who tell us we have to listen to rabbis? That's a wonderful question. I got 20 classes out of that. But those are the types of questions that we can engage in, and people are constantly, I don't want to say challenged in a threatening way to their beliefs, but we're in a situation where, because everyone's welcome as they are, you can't help but be exposed to people who might think a little bit differently and might get in the back of your head and start expanding your world. And because it's so diverse, people are free to be themselves. There's a lot more honesty. So there's no pretense. If you're in a community where everyone's the same, as even if they're open and they're welcome, if everyone's dressed in a suit, you come in jeans and a shirt, you might feel out of place. Not because they want you to, but that's just how it is. Here, there's none of that. It's come as you are, and you will feel comfortable as you are, and be made to feel comfortable as you are. And that means no one's trying to push anything on anyone else. So that's just a super, super duper quick summary. A few other interesting things here. You can see some of the old marble that's in the wall. There was a Mr. Joseph Kronberg who passed away on October 13th, 1912, before the synagogue was completed. He apparently was a fairly prominent member of the community. Rabbi Judah Leib Rose, I'm assuming was the first rabbi. We actually met one of his grandchildren who had tracked us down and had come by. You see some pictures here that seem to look at about a particular individual. This person's name was Benny Sauerhoff. He was the longtime president of the synagogue. He passed away 2 years ago. That was actually painted by one of our members who made that little thing over there, which is a sculpture of him out of chopped liver, which he liked. Meaning he took chopped liver and made kind of a sculpture out of him. It was cute. So he had passed away.
That's a photo of that.
Yeah, it's a photo of that. That's not the actual chopped liver thing. But it was very cute. And he actually asked him, "So new, what do you think?" And he took a sliver and he said, "Delicious." So Benny, the reason why he's displayed so prominently here is, for one, he was not only the longtime president of the synagogue and the communal leader, he was incredibly well loved, and he was the one that fought really the sale of the synagogue. Back in the 2000s. If it wasn't for him, his efforts, and those of some other members of the communities at the time, this synagogue would not currently exist. So that's why there's certain things dedicated to him. Other parts of the synagogue, because it's so old, one of the challenges that we faced, somewhat unique here, is how much to keep versus how much to modify, because so much of this is historic. And once you lose history, it's gone. So these benches are all original, as far as I know. They've been painted. These radiators have also been painted. Those are things which we probably would like to get rid of. Let me show you. These are old gas heaters. The way that we use them today is we turn this lever, shoots on the gas, I stick in a lighter, and you hear a whoosh, and that's how this place is heated. New buildings cannot have this. I've been told these were outlawed since the 20s, but we've been grandfathered in. One of the many changes I'm sure we'd like to make it a more efficient building. But it's a good example about how things used to be and how things are. You can even see some of the lights here. The fixtures could probably stand some replacing too. Some have burnt out bulbs. I once tried replacing the bulbs myself, and there were problems with the fixtures itself. So. Yeah, we make do with what we can because one reason it's in the state that it's in, the Lower East Side had a lot of immigrants, which meant no one really had money. The goal was, once you had money, you left the Lower East Side. You went to the suburbs, you got a nice house, you had a lawn. But because you didn't have that much money in the Lower East Side, no one could really afford to pay, to keep things up. So the immigrants instead just did whatever they could to get by. One of my favorite pieces, so over there, this is the Aron Kodesh in Hebrew, the Ark. This is where we keep the Torah scrolls. And over the Ark, what you find in many Jewish communities is a curtain called a parochet. That fell on one Yom Kippur, where someone tried to pull the rope to open it, the whole thing came crashing down. Someone in the synagogue pointed out that what was keeping it up was the key to a sardine can. That was one of my funniest pieces of trivia. And it's on one hand, it's ridiculous. On the other hand, when you have people with no money, you just do whatever you can to get by. You fix it up with whatever you have. So yeah, on one hand, it's crazy, but on the other hand, it represents the spirit of what people did here and how they kept things going. What's that on top? So that on top is a window, I've been told, that's kind of been painted over. What it says there in Hebrew is Lezecher Nishmat Rabbi Yechiel Michel Bar Pinchas Rat Zal. And what that means is it's dedicated to the memory of a particular individual, Yechiel Michal ben Pinchas, in English Roth, and you see that name a few places. It's the same Hebrew name on that plaque right over there. Just if you're attuned to the Hebrew, it's actually spelled differently in different places, and it's probably that guy here that the odd vertical light fixture is named after, where it says in memory of Max Roth, was probably that person, and Pinchas Roth was probably his father. There's no way for me to know it, just based on the language and the words. Pinchas Roth was the one who dedicated the parochet curtain there. So yeah, that's pretty much the downstairs, and this is the pulpit where we have services and read from the Torah. And I'll show you upstairs.